Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my brand new audio only podcast, Alexandra Mayers. Just some thoughts, because a lot of times I have just random thoughts that I really want to share with you, the public, but I don't necessarily want to always share these thoughts via a video podcast because sometimes I don't feel like having y'all look at me, to tell you the truth. I feel like I let you look at me quite a bit over the years. I've let you see far more of me than most people. So I'm scaling back a little bit. I'm really happy with this platform, Podbean, that I found when it comes to sharing my podcast. So I hope all of you subscribe or follow or, whatever, because on this podcast, I think you'll be surprised when it comes to just my pattern of thinking and my way of thinking. But I feel like it's just time for me to share it at this stage, because as I move on in life and get into whatever it is that I get into, I'm hoping that some of you along the way will want to be a part of my projects. But I feel like anyone I work with in the future, I feel like it's vital that you know how I really think and what's in my head. So that's why I'm putting this together. So anyway, we'll start episode 1 off by talking about a dream that I had a couple of nights ago. I guess in episode 2, I'll talk about a dream that I had last night, but we're not at episode 2 yet. We're at episode 1, so we got to start a few nights ago. I had a dream about bartending again, which is strange because I really hadn't thought about that time of my life in a long time. Prior to my getting into the world of adult entertainment as an exotic dancer and a webcam model, I was a bartender for quite a few years. Actually, when I was an exotic dancer at one point, I bartended about 3 days out of the week at this particular club, and then 2 days out of the week I would dance. A couple girls did that where I was, and it was a nice balance. It really was. Because, being an exotic dancer, you're very prone to burnout very quickly. But the same thing with bartending, and I'll tell you why. Now, when it comes to the mechanics of the job, when it comes to bartending, I love it. It's very easy for me. It's just basically memorizing a bunch of drink recipes, being proficient on a cash register or a computer, however it is that they take in the money. The hardest part of the job, in my opinion at least, is dealing with morons. And I don't care if that sounds mean, because it's true, especially in touristy types of areas, such as where I live in Southeast Florida. And that was where I lived at the time when I got into bartending. I lived on the West Coast for a little while too, but I guess I really started my time in the adult entertainment industry in Southeast Florida, and now I'm back here again after living on the West Coast for a while to kind of conclude that portion of my life, I suppose, as an independent investigative blogger, but that's beside the point. Anyhow, when I was bartending, it really, truly amazed me as to exactly who thought that it was okay to be rude to either the bartender, the wait staff, whoever. Because oftentimes the people who are the rudest in bars and restaurants and other establishments, usually they're the people who have absolutely nothing going on in their life of substance. And I guess that's why they're rude. because they hate themselves. When I was bartending at this one particular establishment, and this was in the Miami area off the Palmetto Expressway, very, very, very busy establishment. I actually loved working there. It was a really awesome mix of people. Everyone had a great attitude. The money was great. But there was one problem. For some reason, on Thursday nights, we would get a crowd of construction workers, blue-collar guys, who all happened to be of Cuban descent. And I'm the kind of person who really doesn't even have a racist bone in her body. I've dealt with people that have brought on feelings of prejudice over the years, but those feelings have always dissolved because I've realized, hey, it's not where they're from or their cultural or ethnic background. It's just who they are as individuals. And I suppose that's the case when it comes to this particular group of people that I'm going to talk about in this podcast. But it was a group of about 10 men, blue-collar construction workers, Cuban. But I have to be specific when I talk about the type of Cuban that they were. I would say that they were second-generation Cuban males whose family lineage most likely was primarily of Caucasian European descent, though they spoke Spanish. And that's what a lot of people have to realize, really, when it comes to the Latin community. Latin, Latino, or Latina, those terms do not refer to a race. Anyone of any ethnic background can label themselves as being Latin or Latina. You could be Asian, but still classify yourself as Latin. You could be Black. You could be white. You could be multiracial, a mixture of all of those ethnic backgrounds. You could be Native American. A lot of times when people refer to Mexicans, they're actually referring to Native Americans. But this particular group of men was very racist towards me, African Americans, Blacks. And I think I know where the racial hatred that they embody came from, especially considering someone that I'm dealing with in the court system right now when it comes to his racism. And this is someone else who happens to be a Cuban, a Caucasian Cuban. When America allowed a lot of Cubans in several years ago, the Cubans who decided to migrate to America, for the most part, or at least who heard about it first, were of the upper hierarchy in Cuba. And Cuba is and still and was actually a very racist country. They treated people with African heritage horribly. Their political system did, at least. So when the quote unquote upper crust Cubans came to America, the ones of Caucasian descent, they thought that it was only going to be them. But it could be anybody. It wasn't just for white Cubans. It was for Black Cubans, multiracial Cubans. I think it was called the Mariel boat lift. I think that's the term of that mass migration. So when the white Cubans found themselves in America, and they realized that they weren't viewed as being on an equal platform as white Americans, they were actually viewed more so on the same platform as African Americans. It made them very upset, and it made many very resentful. And I think that they taught their children to be overtly racist and prejudiced so that perhaps they felt that if they were overtly racist and prejudiced towards blacks or African Americans, it somehow made white Americans look at them like, oh, didn't realize that they weren't white like me. Ha ha ha. Well, it actually has the opposite effect. It makes a lot of people view Caucasian Cubans nowadays as actually being very uneducated and very trashy due to their racism. But anyways, this group of men, getting back to the bartending story, they would come in Thursday evenings, and they just had the worst attitudes, very demanding, always sending drinks back as though it wasn't, made right for them. Very rude to the staff, very just a level of entitlement that they displayed. I mean, there were a couple occasions to where the management just had to ask them to leave because of their poor attitudes and the way that they treated people. It was just disgusting. But one drink that they would consistently ask for, which was, and one day I had to tell this one guy to go to hell. They would always say, "Hey, mommy," and they knew my name, "Alexandra, I need a Cuba Libre with a lime." That's how they would say it. And they always wanted it strong. They had to have it strong, okay? "I need it strong, mommy. Give me a Cuba Libre with lime, strong." And for those of you who are not aware, all a Cuba Libre with a lime is a freaking rum and Coke. And if you want it strong, you basically don't want any Coca-Cola in it. You just want rum on ice. But keep in mind, these are a bunch of really rude dudes. And they were cheap too, never tipped. And they didn't really want any ice in it. They just wanted a big glass of rum. That's all they wanted. So I probably shouldn't even tell this story when I think about it because it's so horrible. One night they come in and it was me and a guy bartending, and the guy that was my bartending partner for the most part was a real badass Colombian dude. Real badass. And he hated these guys. So I got to where I wouldn't even serve this group of people anymore. And so this guy, and his name was, what was his name? Rico. That was his name, Rico. So one day Rico has to serve these guys, and they're like, "Hey, papi, give me a Cuba Libre with a lime, strong." And I'll go ahead and tell this story because the establishment is closed now. And this was a major a health code, not even a health code violation. I think it was possibly criminal what this guy did. So he's like, okay. He goes in the back. He's like, oh, you know what, Alex, I don't think I have any more rum in my, over here. I'm going to go in the back and grab some. Instead, he comes out. He didn't come out with a bottle. He came out in a few minutes with a tray of these drinks, right? And then he comes from behind the bar and brings it over to the guy's table. And I'd never seen him do that, and I was like, I wonder that's interesting. I guess he's like, what, bartender / server now? So I say to him, I'm like, "Hey, Rico, that was nice of you to bring those drinks over right to their table, considering how they talk to people." And he was like, "At the end of the night, I'll tell you why I did it like that." So the night goes on. These guys leave. There were no problems. It was weird. But they never came back. So like I said, this establishment did close later, so it's okay to tell this story. But this is what Rico tells me in the night. He's like, "Remember how I brought those drinks over to those guys?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that was, like I said, that was very nice of you." And he's like, "Yeah, well, they drank my piss tonight." And I was like, "What?" That's and I guess that's why they never came back. I guess that's why they never came back, because you know, I'm not even going to go into detail about that, but you got to be careful how you treat bartenders. You really do, or any sort of wait staff. How you talk to them, even if you have the nerve to go on social media and talk horribly about them later. People, you'll be surprised as to how things get back to wait staff and what they may do to your food or drink if you don't treat them properly. So anyways, I kind of wanted to share that story because I'm kind of torn as to whether or not to open a small bar in the next few years. A part of me would love to. If I were to do so, I would probably do so in a Midwestern state, because I think people in the Midwest tend to treat others very nicely. I would not do it in South Florida, wouldn't do it in the Northeast, definitely not on the West Coast. So we'll see. We'll see. So, anyhow, I hope y'all enjoyed this first podcast of Alexandra Mayers. Just some thoughts. And maybe I'll do another podcast tomorrow, or later today, or next week, or whenever the hell it is that I feel like it. Bye-bye.